we are making baked apples. And I know that that sounds like really basic and you're like, ugh, but you guys, these are really, really good. And let me just tell you that my house smells amazing right now. My name is Sarah. I have a health and fitness blog over at sweetblondesfitlife.com. And what I'm super passionate about, and I help people do, is unprocess their diets and what they eat. So we eat less things out of boxes, and we eat more like natural, whole foods. So some people like to call that eating clean. I like to call it unprocessing what you eat, but it's all the same thing. And that's what we're talking about tonight. I've been like cooking. I kind of like do this thing where I batch cook, and so my kitchen is a little messy. This is your step-by-step tutorial for making a baked apple. So good. And so honey crystals are basically like dehydrated honey. It's basically honey without the nasty mess. So as you can see, this box says honey without the sticky mess, which is awesome. So the first thing you want to do is take an apple. You can use any kind of apple for this. I personally am using a Fuji apple, but you can use any kind. Ones that work great for this are like Honeycrisp apples or Honeycrisp, Fuji. If you like tart, you can use like a green apple. That works fine too. So this, we're gonna core it. So the key here is you don't want to go all the way through the bottom of the apple. You want there still to be a base there because we're gonna fill this up. Instead of just making, you can see this apple core is pretty narrow. Instead of just making one small narrow hole, I just went into it like 2 or 3 times, so it's a little bit of a wider hole there. I have a baking dish. I'm just using a small like Pyrex dish because I'm making one and it's easier for me. If you wanted to make 4 or more, then you would probably, or you know, even more than 2, you would want to use a larger dish, but I'm just using this small one here. Okay, so and I have 1/4 cup of water in the bottom of this. So we set our dish here, put the apple in the dish, and then in here I have our mixture that's gonna go inside the baked apple. So I have 1/2 tablespoon of honey crystals. I have 1/2 tablespoon of cinnamon in here. I also have a tablespoon of chopped walnuts and a tablespoon of raisins. So again, that's 1/2 tablespoon of honey crystals, or honey if you don't have honey crystals. It's just a lot messier. So 1/2 tablespoon of honey crystals, 1/2 tablespoon of cinnamon, a tablespoon of walnuts, and a tablespoon of raisins. Now, if you don't have honey, I'm just gonna mix this up. If you don't have honey crystals, what I recommend doing is actually just mixing up the cinnamon, the walnuts, and the raisins, and then adding the honey in at the end, and it won't be as messy that way. So I'm just gonna use the tablespoon and spoon this in here. So again, this is just the cinnamon, the honey, the walnut pieces, and the raisin. Now, if some of it falls into the water that you have in there, it's totally okay, because what happens is when this bakes, the water is going to evaporate anyways. So then what we're going to do, so you guys can see I have this all stuffed in here. I'm just going to try to push it down in there, because what I'm going to do is the last ingredient that you need, I'm using ghee, which is clarified butter. You can totally use just like regular butter, like grass-fed butter or something like that instead. But we're going to take a teaspoon of ghee and place it on top. Ghee's a little hard, so it looks a little weird, but we're going to take a teaspoon of ghee and place it right on top of our apple. Just like that. So we place the ghee on top of the apple, and you can totally leave the butter or the ghee out. Like if you don't do dairy, you can totally leave this out, and that is perfectly fine. It just adds a little bit of flavor and taste to the recipe. So now that we have this all done, you are going to put it in your oven at 375 for an hour. Now, if you don't feel like warming up the whole oven, you can use a toaster oven like this. Otherwise, you can just use your regular oven. And you know what? You could probably even make these in a crock pot. I have not tried that, but you probably could leave them in the crock pot all day long, like, you know, while you're out running errands or whatever, or at work, and you could totally have come home to baked apples. This is what we're having for dessert tonight, but this would also make a great snack. This is the one from earlier. So you guys can see the apples like popping open, the raisins are all puffy, it looks all good, there's all the natural juices in the bottom. Like, this is gonna be really yummy. And when you actually serve this or you eat it, it's extremely delicious. If you just take this syrup, it's not syrup, but you know, this liquid that's on the bottom, and pour it over the apple, so good. Started with. So you guys can see before and after, Okay. So the recipe for this, one last time, you need 1 apple. I recommend using something like a Honeycrisp or a Fuji apple. If you like more tart, you could use a green apple, okay? So we have 1 apple, and then we core the apple, okay? And into the core, you're going to put a mixture of chopped walnuts. So it's 1 tablespoon of chopped walnuts, 1 tablespoon of raisins, half a teaspoon of cinnamon, and half a teaspoon of honey crystals. You can find these at Walmart. They also sell them like at a lot of other stores. They're usually like by the honey, right? If you don't have honey crystals, just mix together the cinnamon, the raisins, and the walnuts, okay? Then you're going to put that into the core, like a filling. And then you're going to, if you're using liquid honey, you'll drizzle the honey in there. And then you're going to put, optional, you're going to put a teaspoon of ghee, which is clarified butter, or grass-fed butter on top, and then you put it in the oven at 375 for an hour. Okay? The last thing is, if you want to put some water in your dish, it just kind of helps keep the apple hydrated, but the apple will naturally like create liquid when you bake it anyway. So it is up to you, whatever you prefer, if you want to put water in the bottom of the dish or not. You know, you can modify the recipe to meet your dietary needs or whatever they, you know, to meet your goals, whatever that might be leaving out. You could leave out the honey. It's a nice natural sweetener. You could use stevia instead if that's more up your alley. And you can also leave off the butter if you don't do dairy or anything like that. Actually, putting the apple together is extremely easy. It's just the baking it and waiting for it to bake that takes a long time, because, you know, an hour in the oven is like, dude, I'm ready to eat this. So yeah.